My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, I'm talking with Stephen Bell of Gardens. Stephen's journey is notable in a few ways that make this a really fun discussion. First, Stephen comes from more of the world of screenwriting and narrative design, and had to learn how to adapt those skills to the role of the founder. Second, the founder group of Gardens comes from smaller, more indie studios, and chose to take a much larger swing, and then had to figure out what that actually meant. Finally, Stephen recently changed roles within Gardens, becoming the CEO. All of this makes for a fascinating conversation filled with humor, humility, and a lot of reflection on lessons learned so far. Let's jump in. Where I often like to start these interviews is to get an understanding of what led up to you sort of crossing that threshold from I'm thinking about starting a studio too. Oh no, I'm definitely starting a studio, right? And like what led to that decision, what sort of pushed you over the edge, and what was that moment, right?
Sure, yeah. So starting a studio kind of came about largely through my brother and co-founder Chris. I've been very fortunate to, have gotten to work with him on multiple projects going back years now. I came up actually in the film industry as a longtime screenwriter, made some short films and stuff like that as a director. And through Chris kind of got introduced to the independent game scene in LA and started kind of, narrative consulting that turned into games writing, narrative design, so forth. And was fortunate to, jam with him on things like What Remains of Edith Finch or help out on Sky Children of the Light, which he was the lead designer of. And after he shipped Sky, he took some time off. It was a big project. It definitely a bit burnt out and needed a break. My brother's I'll brag for him. He's pretty beloved, I think, across the indie scene. He's like the sweetest person and really renowned for deeply social kind of nonverbal play, multiplayer play, and the games that we'd made before, especially Journey and Sky, and even his game way before Journey. He really focuses on using nonverbal play to kind of bring players together, form relationships, bridge cultural language barriers, things like that. For years, people, would ask him, when are you starting your own studio? He kicked around the idea when, back when he was like, I don't know, early 20s or whatever. And I think raising money at that time was a bit more of a Herculean task than when we were able to jump into it. But having, or there just there weren't the mechanisms, I guess, to do so. Other than just getting a, traditional publisher, and publishing deal. So yeah, when he had shipped Sky, took some time off, was considering, directing a project for TGC, returning to the studio. But it kind of was just right time, for myself, for him, and for our other co-founder, Lexi Dostal, who he previously made games like, Dust Force, and had done, he was working on another title for a while and did games for like Annapurna, different places. We were just, it was the right time, for each one of us to seriously consider, hey, what if we did the thing now? What if we jumped and, kind of tried to start a studio ourselves, which we had talked about for years. And having, Chris and Lexi were pretty, basically best friends. So he's like another brother to us. And they've shared, a lot of this similar sensibilities and ideas around deeply social multiplayer and things they'd want to try. So it was at that point when, we're talking late 2019, the venture scene is starting to bubble up, or really not even bubble up, really starting to get going in games. Interest rates were low, and we said, yeah, hey, maybe we take a stab at this and jump into it. And when I say jump into it, that meant for us spending like a year and a half paper prototyping and kicking around ideas and working other jobs while we continued to iterate not only on what could be the project that could raise funding and start a studio, but what would the studio be like? What kind of culture would we want to grow? How would we want to approach this? And so, yeah, it was more kind of just like stumbling into it. And then the next thing I knew, we were, a year and a half later and pitching for funding, and it kind of just went from there. But and I went from really like splitting my time as like in the film industry and in games to being like, I still will sometimes write like I have a long gestating script that I'll get to my managers in like 10 years, I'm sure. But, to suddenly having a game studio, and we're fortunate to be able to raise a seed round of venture capital and go off from there. So yeah, I think it was really, really what it was taking a look at the landscape, that was where studios were able to suddenly raise venture and there was a sudden flow of capital into the scene in that way. And us, saying to ourselves, if not now, when else? Like, each one of us will jump onto a project. And Chris's last projects, I think, took like 7 and 5 years respectively or something. So we said, why not take a stab at this? And knew that we wanted to focus exclusively on like deeply social multiplayer. What that meant, as we were prototyping, was all over the place. We tried so many different genres. We had, even like a sweepstakes idea, kind of game show almost. So like live event thing. That was, it was around the time like HQ Trivia was like had just popped off too. I think we're just after that, right? So it really wasn't like we want to do this genre specifically, or had, we had plenty of game ideas, but it was more about what is the right thing that we could start with and that we could scale over time and build with a medium-sized team and still have, high ambitions for and really reach for that kind of commercial success that you need to justify venture funding. So yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer. It was just kind of a lot of iteration, a lot of discussion. We had actually gotten pretty close on a couple of the prototypes that we put together to signing deals with various publishers, some of whom aren't around anymore, or one platform that's not around anymore. And you might be able to take a stab at who it is, but ultimately actually pulled those ideas back and said, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot here, or we had, seem ungracious or anything, but it was more like, is this the right idea, right? Could this be the thing that is the financial spine for a studio, and especially for a studio that is making a venture play, right? Because I think the truth of it is like, and I think Mitch Lasky said this on like the Game Craft podcast, which I've enjoyed listening to, was that like, there are some ideas that are probably better served just going after a publishing deal. That's not easy to get in and of itself, especially these days. I think the expectations of what you'll have going into that have been, increased and are higher and higher. But at that time we said, okay, if we're going to, try to justify that kind of equity investment, what's something that is true to our vision, true to the thesis of what we want Gardens to be, and that we can, scale over time to meet that global ambition or vision.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely sounds like the moment you guys recognized in the moment that there was that opportunity for ambition,
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
and spending the time to be like, okay, let's not be distracted by something that is closer to what we've done in the past. Let's actually rise to that ambition.
Yeah, and what's funny is like I'm hopeful that we'll be able to show people some stuff soon. We're getting there. You'll see DNA from stuff we've made in the past, like very clearly. But we didn't necessarily start there. I think we have certain ideas and around multiplayer that we've wanted to explore and continue to push forward, and or bring into new types of spaces and contexts. So you'll see, you'll see echoes for sure in what we're making now. But yeah, it was definitely us looking around and seeing other studios get funded and going, hey, why not take a stab at this? But we definitely didn't just, raise straight away. Like, and I will say, I definitely was Chris's pedigree, having worked on Journey and What Remains of Edith Finch and Sky, that I think was a big reason. That was like that really drove, I think, our ability to raise, funding. Definitely got us the meetings. But we did spend a lot of time iterating on, the idea that could, justify that pitch. And then when we went into it, it was just, his pedigree and a PowerPoint presentation, and, probably wildly off budget projections as well. I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean that's always true, especially if the first like pre-seed seed pitch.
Yeah.
This is all
this
wrong.
Will be this little thing, and then wait, no, actually,
yeah. Now, one of the things that I'm interested in is it sounds like part of that year and a half long process was not just prototyping and figuring out like, hey, what is a game and things that we want to aspire to on that side of what are we building, but it was also the like, what is a studio, if we're rising to this ambition on the game side, what is a studio that we want to build around that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which it also sounds like the three of you were all prior to this sort of really focused much more on the building game side of things, not necessarily the building organization side of things. And so I'm curious, on that year and a half journey, what were the really big conversations? Like, how did you structure that for yourselves? And also, what was the kind of learning journey that you had to embark on to even bring an informed opinion to each other about that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate in that Chris and Lex are both brilliant and lack ego, and are two of the most like ethical and sweetest people I know. So that makes it a lot easier, and I just, to trust them implicitly, right? So I've been very fortunate in that, because you have to, we definitely had a lot of conversations about, what is Gardens, right? As a studio and a brand, and what is it meant to be? What is the culture that we want to grow? Like we, spent a lot of time working through the values that we wanted to drive the studio, and not just, the words that we say we care about, but like, what does it mean to put those in practice in a work space, as part of a team? How do you live them out? The project, I think, also very much like will reflect the way it's made, right? So, we tried to look at the best practices that we had experienced working for other studios, or look at other studios that we admired. You know, friends in the industry even gave us like their employee handbooks to study and set and pull things from, as well as like looking at what we thought didn't work or what was outmoded thinking, or just some things that we knew we were going to try to guard against as um, fiercely as possible, right? We'd all experienced crunch and burnout. Chris was like very burnt out by the time he had shipped, and like that's just the reality of the situation. And still very proud of like what they had accomplished. And we said, okay, well, how do we create something really ambitious, knowing that there will be deadlines, there will be stresses, there will be pressures. It doesn't mean that like we won't at times like work long hours, because you're creating art and you're passionate about it, and sometimes you're going to put in the effort and that extra work there. But how do we ensure that we are looking after one another and taking care of one another as founders, and then as extending that to whomever was crazy enough to jump in with us. It's a venture play. I always tell everybody, like, it is a speculative play. There are no guarantees here. And so how do we treat people fairly and honor them for their willingness and belief, willingness to jump into this with us, and belief in it, and the care that they put into it. And just kind of like continue to ask ourselves that throughout the process and all the way up to today. I think like as far as what we've had to learn, so much. I'm every day I try to ask stupid questions all the time, just even to validate my assumptions or what I'm pretty certain of, or just learn something. And how to raise money, how to navigate that whole process. Once we had the money, how you get a business on its feet, that probably the first 4 to 5, like I remember when our first funding hit my account, our business account, I like freaked out. I was like, oh no, what have we done?
Now
very,
it's real.
very grateful. But like, I remember we were talking to our lawyer, and he was like, do you have any other questions? And I said, yeah, I have one. How do I end up in prison? And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, like, what don't I know that I have to do? Like I don't know, some sort of filing or something like that, that like is going to have me playing tennis in some like minimum security jail. And he was like, as long as you don't like abscond to, I don't know, the Bahamas or something like that, you're probably okay. But it was just being very clear about like what we knew and what was new to us, and asking for help. Like, we very much try to pull in our partners and ask them all sorts of questions, and ask them to do stuff for us. And that continues to today. I don't understand, I've seen some studios kind of work in a bit of a black box. And, it's like, oh, the capital comes in and then you're just kind of off doing your thing. We try to be pretty transparent with our partners and pull them in, because like, we were in a very fortunate position to have some demand around us, and be able to be a bit selective and say, okay, what, in addition to capital, what kind of value can we be pulling in that is actually material, that actually can help us do this thing. So, whether that was just even like learning what a PEO is and how to set that up, you know what I mean? To like our first, our first efforts at hiring. And then once now, what I know, like a good hiring process looks like, it's like, man, there's just so much. And, I think even going up through like our Series A financing and to today, we kind of constantly felt like we were just fumbling the ball forward, Tried to be very cognizant of like what we didn't know, and almost practice hypervigilance. I think I just, that's a natural state for me anyways. So constantly looking down the line and going like, oh God, we have 20 something months of runway where what do we do? And ensuring that we were planning and scheduling things correctly and very clear about what our goals were, to get where we had to get to keep this thing going. But yeah, I don't know. It was just, it's been wild, and it's like we're learning stuff every single day, and to be suddenly executives of a company, and have to learn that on the fly. Like yeah, it's a lot. I don't know.
Yeah. You sort of mentioned a bit about who your co-founders are
Yeah.
and your relationship in that long-time relationship. I'm curious how you would sort of frame what the mix is, right? Like a lot of times, sometimes people do it in fairly reductive ways of like, oh, that's the tech co-founder and that's the design co-founder or the art co-founder or whatever. But like, really, I've often found that it's way more nuanced than that, of like what each person really brings to the table and how that really complements and offsets each other. So when you look at Chris and Lexi and yourself, how do you frame, hey, this is what I bring to the table and this is what they bring to the table, in the way that this works as a really solid co-founder group?
Yeah. It's definitely more nuanced than just putting us in, a just kind of clean box or category. Chris and Lexi are both, designers. Chris came up as both kind of a designer producer with an art background. Lexi is just a wizard. Lexi can do everything. He's like a designer, engineer, can do tech art, like graphics rendering. It's crazy. But both, became very close friends, I think, having met at a GDC, and then, sharing a lot of similar sensibilities and opinions about games, and specifically multiplayer games, and, the kinds of things they wanted to make. Um, so they, I would say, were the two kind of like main authors of like the project that we're building. They were those kind of the two authorial voices really that um, helped us craft the core vision for what the game should be, how the core design works. Like what we pitched is what we're making. It evolved and grown and been refined in various ways, and the ambition of it has definitely expanded. But we have known exactly what the vision is since we pitched our seed round. And that's very much thanks to the two of them and just how well they are, how good they are together. And they both, I think, I don't know even know if I could describe the differences in the way they work, but it's extremely complementary. I come from like a narrative background, storytelling, so I was, helping kind of all the world building and stuff like that, as well as like on the pitching side of things. That's something I was very accustomed to through being a screenwriter, having to develop pitches, pitch them to executives, things like that. So that was suddenly helpful. And then as we formed the company, we kind of just broke it up into like Chris was original. I'm the CEO. I should be clear. I'm the CEO and narrative director right now. Chris is the chief creative officer and creative director on the project. Lexi is CTO and our like head of R&D. Because again, he can kind of do everything.
Do everything.
He was I will say the one difference actually is that like he can code. I cannot. Chris can somewhat. So that was a big thing where it was like, okay, you be the CTO because we don't know. So that was one clear differentiator. But yeah, it was a lot more nuanced. But when we started the company, it was like, okay, Chris, you were kind of, he was like the kind of most well-known person on the team. Definitely a draw for the studio, given his pedigree. So it made sense for him to kind of be the face of the studio. And he was a tremendous CEO for 4 years. It was only just recently that he decided, like, I want to have more bandwidth and focus just on the creative of the project. It's also what he loves. So I had been kind of helping in that capacity as like a chief commercial officer, whatever that means, made up title. Um, and so I, very honored that like the board then nominated me to take over there. But it was really kind of just sharing the load between the three of us from the jump, like developing pitches, developing the business strategy, and the design of the game. Like they definitely drove the core of it, but it was just kind of an iterative process between the three of us. And then once we got the company on its feet, it was like, okay, you be CTO, you be CEO, Steven. I'm like, well, I'm the writer, so I guess I'll just also do all the admin and business, like that stuff. So I was suddenly in charge of, understanding how to oversee legal and finance and all of that, which was terrifying, but also, I guess I did okay at. And then, build from there. And then as, we were able to build more of a team, develop the prototype, raise more funding, and continue to scale, we were able to start taking off hats and go like, okay, what should we not be doing? I'm like, I need to all of this admin work that just gives me nothing but anxiety should be on, someone who enjoys this and is better suited to do it. So, we brought in our director of operations, Jane, who's like wonderful, or, again, like the guys, I'm very blessed that like there's really a lack of ego. So like, we switched, we ended up switching engines at one point after raising our Series A. We switched from Unity to Unreal. Lexi was like a 15-year Unity dev, and he was like, you know what? I don't think I should be tech director anymore because I'm learning. We need somebody who can do this. So they've been very good at being able to say, okay, here's where we could use the help and the kind of hats we should take off, as well as like, this is what I want to do and what I'm good at, right? So why would we spread ourselves too thin? So I did not answer your question well, but yeah, it's in terms of like how we fit together. Like Lexi was definitely the one, especially in the early days and still today, who is able to say like, that's a cool idea, but we would, there are certain technical constraints. So maybe we can try it this way, or like maybe if we change it so it's this shape, it'll work. And we're still hitting the goals that we were after. Because, he is very much a designer by study and trade that, he's really great at, still capturing the essence of the thing. Chris is very kind of like blue sky experiential design, going after a feeling or a specific, emotional phenomena that you're after. They complement each other really well in that way. And then I guess I can help with the world building side of things. But, I've gotten better as a designer and a narrative designer over the years, but, I still defer to them. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it's important, especially when going forth with a venture-backed company, to not discount how powerful being a good storyteller is, because so much of that journey is about crafting that pitch and that story of who you are, what you'll do, how it'll be an amazing business. And it's maybe not screenplay worthy, but it is very powerful and very important for the business. It's something that I think, as I've gone on my various journeys, it's something I wish I was definitely better at.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's telling your story again and again and again, and evolving it. As the company evolves. I found that, like, especially in the fundraising side of things, it was kind of it was pitching, and knowing how to how to craft a narrative, right? And then poker, it was the other thing and I played a lot of poker. So I was like, okay, this is I know what this feeling is. I know how to kind of navigate some of the, control of information flow and stuff that you need to be aware of, as you are like running a process. Those were like the two things. So I don't know, those,
they're helpful things.
Narrative and gambling, I guess. But
yeah. When you're going into VC, not the worst. To go back to you guys as a group of founders really quick, how do you find, like, it sounds like in a lot of ways, each of you are really cognizant of each other's strengths and there's low ego. So there's maybe not a ton of necessarily conflict or disagreement to navigate.
Oh, there's tons of disagreement. Not disagreement. Actually, I should clarify. There's not disagreement. Sorry. I'll let you finish your question first of all.
Yeah, I was just like, a little bit about how you guys work to make decisions, deal with disagreements together, and just like work as a cohesive founder team.
I constantly feel like aligned with the two of them. And I think the three of us, just have been aligned from the jump. So very lucky in that way. That doesn't mean we don't debate, and push one another or give one another very candid, direct feedback, that's all, out of love for one another and care for the company and wanting to grow together. It's, these are new roles that we're all taking on and very aware of that. And there, it's a high stress, high pressure situation to be in constantly. But they're basically family to me. So we're able to kind of, have those direct conversations, with, full trust, right? That, we have one another in the company's kind of best interest at hearts. And even if we disagree, we'll get there. The fact that there's three of us also is super helpful in that if there is, a tie that needs to be broken, there's a third vote there. I will say, like, I don't think we've ever actually needed that. It's always been kind of a best idea wins scenario. So there could be, frank discussion or like I would say a good fight, but it's not even really ever a fight. But as soon as someone kind of makes the best argument for, the game or the studio or whatever, at least especially in the early days, you would just kind of recognize that immediately and would be like, okay, great, let's move forward. So, I think there are challenges as you're scaling and stuff too. And, challenges at different organizational numbers as well, as you're having to figure out, okay, we're not a team of 3 anymore. We can't operate like a team of 10. How do we do this? Fortunately, we have that trust and we had done that work to say, what are the values that we want to define this company? What does that mean? In practice, and then how do you exercise those practices at scale? So we at least could have a North Star to be pointing toward. And that has continued to serve us. And we've even like kind of done revision passes on those values, right? As our leadership team has come in and said, hey, this is kind of vague here. What do we actually mean? Let's clarify these things. So we can point at stuff, because you're building a team, often of, people from various places and various work processes, and production methodologies, and then having to say, okay, what is right for Gardens? What do we want this to be? We have to kind of like learn from best practices, but also forget where we came from and say, how do we, build that culture here while also building a game and trying not to run out of money and hit our deadlines and things like that. So, but yeah, I can't really think of a major disagreement we've had, right? Which I feel very fortunate about. But we're constantly talking, we're constantly giving one another feedback, constantly talking strategy. Even if we had specific things we were supposed to focus on when it came to big studio decisions or strategic decisions, we were always in that together, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's a great answer or not, but like, it's basically like talking to my brothers, so, it can be frank and direct and candid, but just because we trust one another implicitly. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense. And I think what I heard out of it is, there is sort of this constant process of discussion and alignment and beating up ideas and doing it, but in that sort of high trust environment where it never raises to the level of disagreement or a fight about it. It's just sort of constantly beating up the idea
Yeah.
all the time a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is probably the healthiest way to do these things, but not everyone is at the same level of trust, right?
And you have to be willing to give one another like real direct feedback, especially if as we're growing into new roles, like, or you know there are hard choices and hard things you have to do, especially as you're scaling a company that'll come along, and you need to be clear on what the expectations are of one another, what your commitments are to one another and to the studio, and that you stand by them. Because even across the three of us, trust is something that has to be maintained, so in mutual trust is like the number one value that we always start with at Gardens too. And it's like, how do you build and maintain that over time? And so I do think um, we take care to ensure that we are fulfilling our commitments to one another as founders as well.
We've talked a little bit about your guys' fundraising journey. You've
Sure.
had a seed, you've had a Series A, venture
Mhm.
funded, kind of the idea to be venture funded from the start. I'm curious, starting out in 2019, seeing the rise of venture capital and the zero interest rate phenomenon really taking off in
Yeah.
2020, along with COVID and everything going crazy.
Yeah.
What's been sort of the biggest difference between how you thought fundraising would go and would happen and what this journey would be like and what's actually played out for you?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, even going back to founding the studio, we were, venture was kind of blowing up, and obviously, we were looking at that. We did have long talks about, is that the right path? Should you just go a publishing route? Like, what are we trying to grow here? You have to really take care to ensure that you understand what you're getting into there, and that you are trying to grow more than grow an actual business and a company, and more than just, I have a cool idea for a game that I really want to make. That can become a business, but you really have to be focused on growing a venture, right? An enterprise. So gave that, real serious consideration. And then when we jumped into it, this is going to sound bad, but, kind of, we were surprised how quickly it happened for us, honestly. And we weren't sure necessarily why it was, happening, especially at the jump. I think Chris's pedigree went a long way with it, but I also think that we had spent so much time iterating and kind of preparing that when we went into pitches, we pretty much had like whatever question was thrown at us, we had answers for it or a slide for it or something like that. And had really thought through, okay, how does this thing succeed and scale over time to justify a venture play? So I think our first round, it came together fairly quickly. It was probably like over a month we were able to close seed. And that was like it very much like a kind of toward the tail, I would say, of the big zero interest rate venture bubble. We raised our Series A in 2023, and things had contracted much more. We actually raised our Series a week after the SVB crisis happened. So we were going into that going like, oh God,
Yeah.
is anybody gonna, invest or even take a look at this? Again, though, we were very, very fortunate where I think we had a lot of demand. We were kind of pretty much oversubscribed right away and able to sign term sheets within a couple weeks, because we had built. We tried to learn. We had a lot of, I think, support and guidance from other founders that were a little bit ahead of us. So I definitely want to credit them. They, across a number of studios, Raid-based, Singularity 6. There's a number of them that were willing to say, that were a bit ahead of us, that were like, here's what we did, here's how you want to think about things. Again, like, we ask a lot of questions and ask for help a lot. And then said, okay, given where things are at, what do we need to be able to hit a Series A? And just focused on building a prototype that we thought could kind of speak for itself. Uh, and and give a real glimpse of what the larger project could be. And we were very fortunate there. So again, that like came together very quickly for us. Still, a stressful process, but we were very thankful that like there was that much excitement around the project. Getting it over the finish line is like a nerve-wracking ordeal. That's something that you just kind of learn through going through the crucible of it all. That's where like the poker side of things came in, because I remember at one point we're just like deep in advanced talks with a couple of parties, and I'm like, what is this feeling? And I'm like, I've been here before. And I'm like, oh, I this definitely feels like a poker tournament. Trying to make sure that the person is receiving the information that I want them to receive, either overtly or because I'm slipping it, quote unquote slipping it, or making sure that we have kind of like our quote horses in alignment, right, where we're building demand in the right way. We just kept asking people for guidance, honestly, like, and then feeling like we were fumbling forward, really, like, honestly, like when, so yeah, I don't know, the funding process, we've been very just fortunate there, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with all of the preparatory work we did at Seed. The demo really carried us at Series A, and Chris really carried us, the things that he had done previously for other studios, just the designer and person he is. So, yeah, we were, I think, very fortunate in both rounds, and we're going to be raising more money. So, we'll see how that goes. But just trying to say, okay, where for others, what is the context we're now in? It is a very different climate than when we raised Seed. How are we going to continue to demonstrate and show that we're building value and building something that can justify further investment? So, yeah, it's that kind of just, you have to be hyper vigilant about it, but we've been fortunate there.
If we zoom in specifically to you, Stephen, what was the hardest part of the fundraising journey for you personally to sort of navigate and deal with?
Thinking back on it, one thing that stands out is when you're pitching and you do as much research as you can with regard to the party that you're pitching to. And then if you're lucky enough to have interest and demand or multiple term sheets, trying to decide basically who you're going to marry after a couple meetings. We really wanted to make sure that the partners that we brought in not only understood the vision for the game, but what we cared about as developers, the kind of culture we wanted to grow for the studio, things that we wanted to do maybe differently. And we were fortunate to find partners in our seed round. Transcend led our seed. They asked the right questions, they leaned into the things that we truly cared about, and were very strong on the culture side of things and where we wanted to go with it. So we were very fortunate there. I think we chose wisely. But that's a challenge, right? You're selling a significant portion of your company to parties that you're just kind of getting to know, and saying, I have to use their previous, what I've know of and can learn of their, previous experiences with other companies. And you can ask around and stuff and try to ask the right questions of them. And a couple meetings, and then make a call. When it came down to Series A, we had, again, we were very fortunate to have a lot of demand there, and we had multiple offers, and we were kind of approaching the deadline for when we said we were going to make a call. And I was just watching the the hands on the clock tick by, and we're like closing in on the deadline, and we had been weighing out pros and cons. Felt very strongly that both, or not even more than that, we had some great partners, potential partners on our hands, but also you're looking at, okay, is this the right partner for this stage of the company? What does this mean for future rounds, for where we'll, be able to take the venture? Do our incentives align, right? And then we definitely passed over that deadline like by a solid 10 minutes. I was like, guys, we got to make a call here. We've been talking about this nonstop for a week. And again, I think we chose well. Like, we have amazing partners. We were able to bring in an incredible syndicate of support with our Series A, whether that's like Lightspeed and Crafton that co-led down to, we're fortunate to be the first studio exposure for the founding family of Nintendo, or we brought in Dreamhaven and Tierda and all these different amazing partners that are constantly helpful. You really have to be vigilant about us evaluating, is this the right person to marry? Is this, is the value proposition there, and do they share in the vision for where we want to go, right? And that's a champagne problem. We were fortunate to be able to have a choice there, but it is a significant choice, because you're selling a big part of your company. It's another voice at the table, and you want to make sure that you are rowing in the same direction. So,
to continue on sort of the zooming in on your personal journey as a founder, and how you've navigated it since you guys got started, what do you feel like right now your sort of biggest struggle is as a founder, or fitting into that founder role, and how have you been approaching finding support for that struggle?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm a new CEO. So
Welcome to the club.
Thank you. Even if I was sharing some of those responsibilities in the past, it's like the buck kind of stops with you on a number, really all of the fronts. And I want to live up to that responsibility, and to, continue where Chris left off. We got invited up to a program at Stanford last summer, kind of like a micro version of the graduate business school program there, like mini accelerator, called DYDX. It was honestly amazing. We were like the only game studio there, and kind of like, why are we here? Like, who let us in? What, we make games? Like, what are we doing here? It was immediately impactful and really insightful. One of the things that continues to stick with me is really what Deborah Grunfeld there would call like powering up into that role and stepping into that role to provide the kind of clarity and conviction that your team needs, especially across a leadership team and down into your ICs. And being a bit more, I think, authoritative there, because I come from the narrative space. I'm like jamming in writers' rooms, or with just off on my own kind of a thing. And there's a lot of responsibility that I feel to my team, to ensure that we are taking care of them, to be treating them fairly, while also hitting our targets, right? So we can be successful, so we can continue to keep this thing going, keep the lights on. So, I think learning how to be a successful manager and an executive leader, like, that's been new to us since we started the studio. Well, to be fair, Chris had been a lead on medium-sized teams, I was always kind of like a gun for hire contractor. Lexi worked on smaller teams, but had at least like he found, he founded Hitbox and stuff. So he had kind of some of the more games business acumen, right? So stepping into that role, there's been a lot to learn and big challenges kind of across the board. I try to, well, one, like we invested in management coaching and, leadership coaching, which I think is valuable. Um, Again, like I look to my team and to their experience, especially across the leadership group, for, insight. It's not like a consensus thing, right? Ultimately, you have to be able to make a call, but I try to make sure that I am going to the right stakeholders, and asking the right questions. Um, and then talking to other founders, other, executives, just trying to absorb as much as I can. And again, I ask a lot of stupid questions. So, I think that has helped me, but yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
It 100% did. You've already mentioned a couple of them that sounds like you've sort of done across the team, as far as, getting coaching, making sure that you've built that relationship with both other founders as well as the other leaders in the studio to sort of like support yourself and ask questions of and that kind of stuff.
mm-hmm.
outside of outside of those things, is there anything you've built up for yourself as primary support structures to for yourself to navigate, not only like previously the founder role, which is a very unique role in many ways, but now also the CEO role, which is a whole different ballgame, as you've been learning of like how you have to present to the team and support that. Like, how have you built it up so that you are taken care of and feel supported on that journey as you're going through
That's a good question. Besides therapy, no, genuinely, whether it's with Chris and Lex or really across the leadership team, um, I have had an amazing group of people around me, for these past three, whatever years. Everybody, I think, really buys into not only, what we're making, but how we want to make it and the culture side of things. And we're constantly challenging one another to get better and work, actually meet the demands of those values and how we are meant to be living them out. So, they're incredibly, supportive. So, you know, um, I feel very fortunate there. Like, you do have to get away from the work, make sure you have a bit, it's hard, right? There's always something that's calling you at you, but, make sure you can have other outlets and interests. And, I have, my partner and stuff too. So make sure you're not just fully consumed by the thing. So I'm very fortunate to have, amazing family support and stuff too. But yeah, like in terms of like personal investments, it's just constantly, again, like reaching out to our partners too. While I mentioned other founders and stuff, but pulling them in various. I talk to Moritz at Lightspeed daily. I was on a call with Transcend today. They, you know, um, asking them for help, maybe modeling something out or, talking strategy with them, um, pulling the other directors on our board in, for advice and insight, and asking, for their help in different ways. I ask for help a lot, because there's so much that's new to me. There's so much that I don't know. And, why wouldn't I go to people who have significant experience and expertise there? So that has helped. And then it's just like, you know, trying to read and learn as much as I can. I was going to say, when we were fundraising, one thing that helped us, was reading venture deals like 5 times, because I don't know anything that anybody's talking about. There was, there's all these terms thrown around, and you're just petrified that you're going to agree to something that you don't realize, was a huge mistake that hampers you down the road or whatever. So yeah, just trying to stay curious and keep learning and asking for help where I can.
I think a significant portion of the folks who listen to this podcast fall into the group of folks who are sort of looking on that horizon and being like, maybe I start something, right? Like they're
Yeah.
either percolating on an idea or they're at the precipice of that moment where it goes from like, maybe I'll start something to I will definitely start something.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for folks who are at that spot and listening, what would be some really key advice or learnings from your own journey that you'd pass along to them? And I mean that maybe not even so much as for whatever company they're starting or whatever endeavor they want to do, but for themselves about to potentially go on a founder journey.
Mm-hmm.
What would you pass along to them?
It's a great question. I can only speak to what has worked for us and served us well. And also, like, I feel a little uh, silly giving advice where, like, I constantly feel like we're still just learning what seems like very basic stuff once I've figured it out. Or things I should have known already. You definitely need that conviction and clarity of what you're trying to make and what it can become, right? When you have that conviction, I would, really make sure that you do that prep work, like, especially on the game side of things. I can't imagine having like raised funding and then being like, what are we going to make now? Uh, Not saying, and I'm sure it's rare that that's happened, but I have seen it. We wanted to make sure that we had answers to as much of the, questions that would be thrown at us as we could. We wanted to make sure that, we could see what the company and this project could be 10 years, 20 years down the line, and how it could evolve. Just continue to kind of try to be looking at it from all angles and asking yourself, like, if I was on the other side of the table, what would I be asking? Right. And have answers in slides for that. This is on like the very early funding pitching side of things. Right. If you're able to, raise money and get going, like, it can be very tempting to just like, okay, we got to just, hit the jets and hire right away. We took some time, honestly, to get the thing on its feet. I would say, uh, hiring is and hiring well is very, very challenging. And when you suddenly have money and now deadlines, because you have a potentially a burn rate, like, you feel this pressure to scale up and achieve the thing. You can get out over your skis really easily. You're at your most cost effective when it's just you. You know, so you know, be very mindful of how you scale, right? Obviously, you need to fill critical needs and roles, right, to be able to meet your ambition. But yeah, you don't want to, scaling brings organizational challenges unto itself, right? You really need to think through kind of that park model, right? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right architecture? What are the rituals that will develop the culture that we want? And I would think very strongly about, like, what is that culture, right? One thing I was surprised by uh, when we went to Stanford, um, was that, there were some companies that were fairly further along than us in their like life cycle that were just now starting to figure out what they wanted their culture and values to be. I Which, credit to them for getting where they were, but like baffling to me. Um, because that's going to drive so much of your decision making, and that's meant to be there to guide the hard decisions, because there will be plenty of hard decisions that you have to make. And it'll be how you make those decisions that really communicates who you are as a company, and the culture that you're crafting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have great advice. I would just say, like, the biggest lesson, I think, is being honest about, the um, whatever lag time you have in resolving issues that come up, whether that's, unfortunately needing to exit someone who might just not fit, right? That is like incredibly difficult always, and especially at the beginning or the first time, or needing to pivot something, or just recognize that you need to make a change. Like, I think that's the statistically, like I read the largest or the most notable kind of factor in whether a company will succeed and can become like an outlier or will fail is like shrinking that lag time, right? That's where, like, even like on the hiring and firing side, the hire slow, fire fast, I think mantra comes from. There are all these cascading effects that will come from issues that you let linger, right? So when you do identify them, you need to be able to, act intentionally, and quickly to resolve them. And that's why, like, being able to then look at your values and how you're meant to live them out and how they're meant to guide the tough decisions, can help you achieve that, right? Because when you're in the thick of it, it can be very difficult to know exactly what the right move is, or so having something to look to and to hold on to and to ground you, I think is really important. But I don't know, where I am very much still learning as we go. So.
Yeah, for sure. What is on the horizon for either yourself as a founder or the company that you've been spending a lot of cycles thinking about?
Yeah, a lot. Hopefully, I'm excited about what's coming. I think, you know, we are a much bigger company than we were. We're about 50 people now from three,
Mm-hmm.
which is insane to me. It's very surreal. It brings all sorts of, different challenges as you go from 3 to 10 to, there's like those numbers too, right? Of scaling where, suddenly you need to kind of look at your work process and maybe your organizational design and shift some things around, and especially also as a remote studio, right? But yeah, in terms of what's coming for me, I mean, I'm just trying to get better as a leader, an executive manager, CEO. For the studio, we are, I think, building something fairly singular, if I can say that, which is difficult, right? We don't have something that we can necessarily point to and say, okay, that's our main comp. We can pulling inspiration from a lot of different places, but doing some things I think are fairly our own. So I'm excited to get that in front of people, and that is coming. So that's exciting. We want to be kind of a global leader in like prestige, deeply social multiplayer play. Um, and to bring some of the ideas around multiplayer and the way bonds form between people into a new space and into kind of a higher stakes arena. I think I've said it publicly, but like I refer to what we're making as like a fantasy adventure Strandbox game. I think I'm the first person to say Strandbox, and at least I have it in print. We actually got to give Hideo Kojima some garden swag last week, so that was very, very cool. So shout to him for some of the inspiration. But just trying to create something that I think is worth players' time and can give them reason to, jump in and, pull away from some of the other places that they're giving their attention. And so we'll be, scaling a bit more, getting a bit more public facing in the relatively near future. We're still very much just grinding on the game. It's, work in progress, but you reach a certain point where you can really see it starting to come into focus from what you knew it could be on paper. And that's like deeply exciting. So we're actually going to be spinning up kind of like larger and larger play tests over the years. We've been doing some small ones. And yeah, that's all exciting, getting it into other people's hands and getting that feedback and seeing what they think. So I'm excited to be able to grow that and start kind of growing our kind of real foundational early community.
Yep. That's always a really exciting moment for on any game's journey of like really getting it into the hands of players more and more and seeing that just raw interaction start to happen and that relationship
and seeing them do something where you're like, why? Oh, how did I miss that? Like, why did I? Yeah.
Oh no!
I am such an idiot. Yeah.
100%. So I always like to close out the main interview with an entirely unfair question.
Sure.
Which is, given your experience so far, in the some point in the future, like who knows, like no judgment on where Gardens goes or does not go or whatever, but sometime in the future, based on your experience so far, do you think you'd start another studio?
Yeah, absolutely. If with the right people, I have been incredibly fortunate to have co-founders who I trust implicitly and who really care about our team and what we're trying to grow and don't really have any, care about their own kind of ego or titles or anything like that. So, and are willing to, really be there, in the trenches with you, it's a big undertaking. I would definitely bring in someone a lot earlier to handle all of the admin and unfun stuff. But yeah, 100%. I would do it again. You know, could try to avoid a lot of the mistakes I made, and then just make different ones, I guess. So.
Yeah, you discover all new mistakes.
Exactly.
It's the pattern of growth.
Yeah.
All right. So the last part of the podcast here, I like to do what I call a little bit of an introspection lightning round.
Cool.
These are questions that came from my own journey of co-founder dating for both of my studios. And they're really like questions I would ask almost at the sort of first conversation where we would both bring answers to these to sort of see, how do our strengths line up? How do our weaknesses line up? That kind of stuff.
That's so fascinating. I would love to hear stories about that too, because I got to know, I knew these guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a very different experience, sort of going into it where you're talking with folks who, even when you like, you don't have a many year family relationship. It's instead like maybe even something
I
just
knew
worked
one
with.
of them for like 30 plus years, which was convenient. Yeah.
Yes, that does help. But where these questions really came from is a friend of mine once remarked, because we worked at multiple places together. She said that the strengths and weaknesses of a studio or a company can also often be traced back to the strengths and weaknesses of the founders. And so I would always start with these questions, mostly out of anxiety of what monstrosity will we eventually create based on our own patterns of strengths and weaknesses.
Sure.
And so to start with, what is your superpower?
Oh God, what is my superpower? Do I have one? I don't know if it's a superpower. Like I think I'm fairly good at, crafting a story and narrative. So that's been helpful as as I mentioned, as a founder and the pitch process. I think I've turned hypervigilance and anxiety into a superpower thanks to therapy and medication. So, I am constantly trying to very naturally like scheme out and game plan contingencies and keep an eye down the line. And I think you have to do that to be able to remain flexible. We always talk about trying to optimize for optionality as founders to make sure that, when opportunity arises, we can strike. And I don't know if any of that's superpowers, but I guess anxiety is probably...
Yeah, I mean, I share that superpower, I guess. Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
Oh God. What are my biggest strengths? I know this is meant to be a lightning round. I think I sound just really redundant, but I'm not afraid to ask questions. And I think like as a CEO, as a founder, you're expected to have answers, and I'm very much willing to say I don't, and to seek out insight and pull people in, and then having the conviction to make a call. I am opinionated, I will say. So once I feel like I have the right data or whatever, I'm not afraid to take a swing. So I think that's probably good. And then again, I think I'm good in a room, honestly, but that comes from years of struggling through that. So you develop that muscle.
What are your big weaknesses?
Oh boy. I can ramble if you haven't noticed. I think like you need to be able to provide real clarity, right? And in communication, especially as you scale, is extremely important. Being effective, articulate, and efficient in how you communicate. So put a lot of focus on that. I think I don't know if it's a weakness, but it was definitely something that we identified as founders, and first time founders, just failing to act as quickly as we maybe needed to resolve an issue, right? Or make a hard call. I think we've gotten better at that over time. That just kind of comes with doing it. You should ask my team what my weaknesses are. That would be helpful. Yeah. And I think I would say probably the challenge of stepping into your power and your role as like a founder or a CEO or whatever. Especially when that's new to you, right? That's something that you have to build. Some people can just naturally, it comes to them naturally, but you know, I think I could at times have be too amenable, self-deprecating, or just trying to keep things positive and not quite step into the authority that I needed to provide that sense of clarity and conviction in a way that you need from your team needs, and is ultimately like you know Deb at Stanford again would say that like powering up can be, and stepping into your role really can be a gift to your team, because it gives them that confidence. So leading with that confidence, I think, is important. I think I've gotten better at that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
And then finally, when you're having a reaction to stress, how does that manifest as a behavior professionally?
It's a good question. Before or after medication, I guess. I like to. I want to resolve things quickly, right? And so that impulse to act, I think, can trip you up. I hate waiting. I can be impatient, I think, but really taking the time to ensure that you are, seeing the full field, and making sure you're getting pulling in the right stakeholders, and evaluating whatever the challenge is thoroughly and accurately, and making a real informed choice. Like um, I ultimately get there, but there there's always something to be working on, that it can very easily feel like, oh God, everything's blowing up or falling apart, right? And um, you can catastrophize when really maybe it's just a Tuesday, and or a bump and growing pains or what have you. So getting better at being able to say like, okay, especially when people bring me something like, is this a real serious problem, or are we through cycles of rituals and, building up that discipline and that shared trust with one another. Is this just a bump that will be smoothed out and we're trending in the right direction? So, yeah, I think like, especially in those early days, like it all feels very overwhelming. You're like, constantly worried you're going to make the wrong choice. Every little misstep feels like you've just, signed your own death sentence, and it's easy to catastrophize that stuff. So keeping grounded, keeping a level head, really making sure that you are taking the time to assess your options and choose the right path forward. Like, fortunately, I have Chris and Lexi. So like we share in all of that together. We communicate constantly, and we help, one another, in those times of stress or in challenging moments. So I think we've done fairly well for ourselves. But you're not going to be perfect, and it's just, being willing to own that and take accountability and learn from that, and move forward. That's all we're trying to ever do.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
My pleasure. I don't know how great that was, but
No, it was great.
it's a lot, and then also half the time I'm like, am I really doing anything? It's everybody else on the team. Like, I just kind of have to make sure the cats are going in the right direction. I have an incredible team around me, so they make, a stressful job a lot easier, and it's just, what I care about is ensuring that I can, make sure that we have the security and resources needed to continue to execute and get there together, and that we are building something that is true to the values that, we laid out when we founded the studio, right? When we set this up. So, and they help me do that. We try to hold each other accountable there.
Is there any closing thoughts or shout outs or anything you want to do here at the end of the episode?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Shout outs, like, there's been so many people that have helped us. Studios, like I mentioned, Raid Base, Singularity 6, Lightforge. We've taken, lessons and best practices from so many amazing friends, young horses. Things are going to come to me. Names are going to come to me as I talk. Our own partners like Dreamhaven. People have been so willing to share their insight in what has worked for them with us, and allow us to make it our own. That, like, we are deeply indebted to all of them. There's way more than that. There are so many names. It is very much not just myself or Chris or Lex. We have an amazing team around us. We have amazing partners around us, and we've had an amazing community from friends and other developers to other founders, that, like, we are deeply indebted and grateful for all of that support. And then, yeah, I'm just excited. I can't say too much, but it's coming, and hopefully we'll be able to share more soon. And I hope, right now we're just able to share art here and there. So I hope you like the art, because I think I can say the game looks like the art. So I'm excited to get it in people's hands.
I'm excited for the industry to begin debating the definition of Strandbox.
Oh, I already have so many people mad about that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
If someone was listening and they heard something that they want to reach out and follow up with you on, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah. You can visit gardens.dev, DEV. And I also think gardens.gg. That's our studio website, and reach out to us there. I believe there's links there. I'm on Blue Sky, if are on that platform. I think it's steph.cam, steph.cam, because that was available for like $5. But yeah, I don't know. I probably said a lot of dumb shit here, but if anything was helpful, or I can provide if I can elucidate further on anything, don't hesitate.
I too am on Blue Sky, and I do appreciate your occasional posts, especially where I got to learn about the term Strandbox.
Oh no, I forget people follow me, honestly. So
Yes, I've unfortunately made it real. We
I was
have to
at
delete everything.
this is a small stupid story. I was at my first GDC awards. David O'Reilly, who made the game Everything, which is amazing, snuck me into like the VIP area. So suddenly I went from like the back of this giant hall to like a table standing right in front of Tim Schafer receiving his like achievement award. Awards end and someone came up to me and they were like, "Hey, you're Chris's brother, right?" Which is how I was usually known for quite some time. And I was like, "Oh yeah." And he went, "I follow you on Twitter." You know, 'cause back when I was on Twitter, and I was like, "Oh god, that's so embarrassing." Yeah. So anytime anybody, I realize anybody's seen anything that I have posted is a little humiliating because I just try to think of the dumbest thing I can post and get it out there. You have to release the stress somehow,
Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, sorry to do it to you.
that's okay.
And thanks for joining us on this episode.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.